This is Angie, and I'm here in the Graceland Archives. And a very interesting fact that not many people know is that Elvis was an avid reader. We have over 600 books in the collection, and Elvis always carried books on the road with him to read between shows. I have a few pulled out here that are just examples of some of the books Elvis would have read. And another note that you'll see, especially in this book here, that Elvis, when he found passages that he was passionate about, would actually underline them so that he could go back and read them again. We really hope that you guys are safe, having fun, and we're going to see you guys here in Memphis real soon at Graceland.
Hi, my name is Lauren Bufford, and I am so excited to be at the Southern Festival of Books today. Before we get started with our authors, Erica Waters and Jess Montgomery, I do want to welcome you on behalf of the Humanities Tennessee. I want to thank our sponsors, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. And if you don't have a copy of either of these two novels or any of the books whose authors you hear today or throughout the next 10 days, please go to Parnassus to make your purchases. It is because of businesses like Parnassus that the Southern Festival of Books is free and open to all who want to partake. So I'm looking at the background. Welcome to my home. But also, I'd like to welcome two authors today, Erica Waters and Jess Montgomery.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Hi.
Well, welcome to my home, to my messy bookcases behind me. I'm just going to give our listeners a little bit of information about both of you. Just going to read the Dust Jacket bio. And then if you could each tell us a little bit about yourself and your backgrounds, and then I'm going to ask that you read a little bit from your book. I know as a participant in Southern Festival, sometimes I go to a session with an author that I love, and I'm eager to hear them read. And sometimes I'm going to someone that I just think I might be interested in. So I'm hoping that we have both kinds of folks listening today. Erica Waters is the author of Ghostwood Songs. Working with a camera here. She grew up in the pine woods of rural Florida, though she is now a Nashville, Tennessee resident, and I do want to know what brought you here. She has a master's degree in English, works as a university writing tutor. Sounds like she is enjoying the great outdoors in Nashville, walking and hiking around town. This is marketed as a young adult book, but yeah, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, but perfect for adults as well. The Hollows by Jess Montgomery. This is tricky for a lefty. And Jess is a literary life columnist for the Dayton Daily News. She is executive director of the Antioch Writers Workshop in Yellow Springs. This is the second in a series called the Kinship Series of Mysteries. And she lives in Ohio, where the book also takes place. Jess, could you start and just let us know a little bit more about yourself and maybe do a brief reading from the book?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here in your beautiful home. And this is my first time at this festival, so I'm really excited to be here. And I am actually the former director of the Antioch Writers Workshop. I do write a column for the Dayton Daily News about the life of writers and events around our area. And I've been writing for a while. But The Hollows is my second book in the Kinship series, which was inspired by the true first female sheriff in Ohio, Maud Collins, in 1925 in the Appalachian area of Ohio, in southeast Ohio. And sometimes folks say to me, oh, Appalachia is not in Ohio. Yes, it is in this southeastern part, for sure. So, I should just go ahead and read a little bit?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll do a little bit of setup because I'm reading just 2 pages from chapter 5. And the setup is that Lily, the sheriff, who was inspired by Maud Collins, and she's still mourning the death of her husband, who had been the sheriff, and now Lily is running for sheriff in her own right. And she's going to her friend Marvina because she needs both Marvina and Marvina's tracking hound to find where a murdered lady had been. So there's been a murder right away at the beginning of the book. And she needs to trace where did this woman come from because they don't know her name. She's not from their area. And she goes to Marvina's and she discovers a man there named Jurgis, and Marvina who's Marvina's friend, and that he spent the night, which it's 1925. So it's a little scandalous back then. And I picked this section because it captures the haunts that Lily still mourns her husband, Daniel. And the novel is really about personal haunts like that and community haunts. The novel eventually reveals some things that happened in the past that are traumatic and haunting for everyone. So with that, my 2 pages. What are you in need of this hour? Jurgis's voice is low, careful, doesn't want to stir Marvina or Frankie. Tracking hound. Jurgis chuckles. Well, if you need to track a possum for a few yards, Shep might do. Lily scratches between the dog's ears. Wasn't thinking of Shep. She means the hounds of the men Marvina employs in her side business, moonshining. Men of distant and uncertain kin to Marvina, a varietal of cousin, second or third removed, and distrustful, working for her only because she toils harder than any of them and knows the secrets for shine made safely. An elderly woman died, hit by a train, maybe accident, maybe murder, nothing to identify the woman, so I need to track her to her kin. At that, Jurgis takes a slow drag on his cigarette. Well, I reckon it's up to Marvina. He gazes with sympathy at Lily. You look wore out. Sit a spell. Lily smiles as Jurgis goes back inside. He sounds like his mother, Nana. But she remains standing. No time for resting. She needs to focus on this case, wrap it up quickly, return her concentration to the election. But instead she thinks, Marvina and Jurgis. Jurgis and Marvina. She should be glad, for she's harbored since Daniel's death, even as she became friends with Marvina while they solved his murder, the fear that Marvina had deep down never let go of Daniel. That because Daniel and Marvina had been friends, and for a time lovers, long before Lily knew either of them, in some way, Marvina too was Daniel's widow. But here is Jurgis. It makes sense. They are a good fit for each other. Yes, she should be glad. And yet, Lily's heart slumps. No one understands her quite the way Marvina does, and the understanding binds them. Marvina is moving on from her losses. Suddenly, Lily is weary from still carrying the weight of hers. Lily sits, after all, bones settling like a sigh into the porch swing. She sways forward, and soon it feels as if she's not moving of her own volition, as if the soft, dark night itself is rocking her, as if the squeak of chain on rivet is tenor harmony to a lullaby of sounds. Shep at her feet, snuffling and sighing, a nearby critter scurrying, a far-off owl crying. She stares into the darkness of the forest. The path she'd hiked up is no longer distinguishable in the shadows, shifting, twitching, but giving no clear shape. Lily adds a sharp gasp to the night chorus as she realizes she's looking for the shimmery, silvery ghost boy. As the night remains closed and dark, a knot within her eases, and at last she closes her eyes. Just for a moment, what could that hurt? A notion long idling at the back of her mind edges forward. What might it be like to have her own stretch of land, her own farmhouse, her own porch to sit on at night so she can stare into enveloping darkness? A door screech startles Lily, and she opens her eyes to Marvina staring down at her, amused. Lily frowns as if irritated at being caught catnapping, but truth be told, she's glad to see even a glimmer of a smile on her friend's mouth. In the past year, sorrow has carved an extra 10 years into Marvina's face, and as Lily roughly rubs her palms to her cheeks, she reckons the same could be said of her.
Thanks. That was great.
Thank you.
Erica, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and read a passage from your book?
Sure, yeah. So my novel is Ghostwood Song. It's a young adult contemporary fantasy about a girl with a ghost raising fiddle. So in the story, Shady has inherited her father's ability to call up ghosts from the grave when she plays the fiddle. But she also knows that the fiddle's tunes bring nothing but trouble and darkness. But when her stepfather is murdered and her brother is accused of the crime, she needs to use that fiddle to raise the ghost of the person he's been accused of killing in order to clear her brother's name. So this is a book that's about family, it's about grief, it's about bluegrass music, and really just about all the things that haunt us and that stay with us. So I will read a section from the first chapter just to set it up a little bit. This is after Shady has been practicing with her bluegrass, well, her band. They're not quite a bluegrass band yet, but she's been practicing with her band in the woods. And this is after they've left home and she's alone in the pine woods outside of her house. I linger in the woods after Sarah and Orlando head home. The sun has gone down and the trees are hushed, shadows spilling like ink through the trees. The air is cool and sweet with the smells of early spring. I raise my fiddle and breathe into the quiet, my eyes closed in concentration. A great horned owl hoots gently somewhere nearby, like a chiding mother telling me to get on with it. Daddy always said twilight was good for ghost raising because it's an in-between time when the barrier between worlds seems to grow thin as tissue paper and the ghosts are at their lonesomest. This fiddle can't so much as poke a hole in that tissue paper, but it's the only one I've got now. Daddy's fiddle drew ghosts like hummingbirds to nectar. Mine only reminds me of everything I'm not, everything I'll never be. My bow slices across the strings, sending a wail into the blue hush and startling the owl, who erupts in a flurry of shocked feathers from a branch high above my head, hooting her displeasure. I play the Twa Sisters over and over again, trying to imagine myself as the drowned sister, watching the world turn to brown river water. Then I play it as the fiddler who finds the body and strings the girl's long yellow hair into a fiddle bow. But the song comes out the same, sad and sweet, quiet and calm as the river that washed up her bones. Finally, I let the song fade, its last notes disappearing into the skinny pines. Night settles in around me, the air close and clammy. Cicadas take up where my fiddle left off, and small animals rustle in the brush. The trees sigh and sigh and sigh. This forest feels like an ear that's always listening, but never hears what it's hoping to. Maybe it misses Daddy's fiddle, same as I do. Maybe it's waiting, like I am too, for a voice of its own. I turn to put my fiddle in its case when, like a belated echo, a snatch of music comes back to me from the trees, deep and pure and full of grief, the dark twin of my bow's last arc. A shiver runs up my spine, spreading chill bumps over my arms. Every muscle in my body tenses, waiting for another note. Shady, Mama yells from the trailer, making me jump. It's dinner time. The door slams and I shake myself. I put my fiddle in its case and turn for home, back through the hungry, darkening woods, back toward Mama's trailer, to the life we made inside the emptiness Daddy's death left behind.
Thanks so much. It's interesting because when I was first assigned these two books and I started reading them, I thought, what are the connections here? But there are so many. One is that you have grieving narrators. Another is something that I think you said earlier, Jess, where you have personal haunts and community haunts coming together. There are ghosts or ghost figures or ghost-like figures in both novels, and each novel has a tremendous sense of place and and a lot of specificity. And I wondered if that's what we could talk about first. Why you chose the locations that you did, and what the connections that your main characters have to the natural world and to the natural place.
Well, I chose to set Ghostwood Song in rural North Central Florida, which is where I'm from. So I grew up a lot like Shady did, like in a really rural area, out in the pine woods, in a trailer, and I haven't lived in Florida in well over a decade, but I feel sort of haunted by Florida. It's stayed with me. I feel like there's really like nowhere else on earth that's quite like North Central Florida. When people hear Florida, they tend to think, beaches, palm trees. But where I'm from, that's not what it's like at all. It's, these like wide open fields. It's lakes full of alligators. It's these beautiful, crystal clear natural springs, oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. So the place I'm from, to me, is just so evocative and speaks so deeply to me. Like, I spent so much of my childhood just wandering around out in the pine woods, by myself with my dog, and I feel like I just sort of absorbed all of that into my being. And so I think when it came time to write this novel, and I wanted to write a book about grief and about music, and this landscape just sprang to life for me. I knew it was exactly right for this story that I wanted to tell. I think there's this deep resonance between the people who live in North Central Florida and the place that they live in. I don't know. I just feel like it's unlike any other place I've lived. Like Nashville, I love Nashville so much, but Nashville's not like that. There's nothing similar there. So for me, it was just this place that was beautiful, but also just a little dangerous. There's rattlesnakes in the woods. There's feral pigs running around. There are alligators in the lakes. And so I think for me, why this setting is so evocative, it is this juxtaposition between deep beauty and also kind of a sense of danger, which works really nicely for a book about ghosts.
It does.
Well, yeah, similarly, now I want to both read your book, but I would prefer to read it while I'm in Florida. That sounds like an amazing part of Florida that I haven't yet experienced. It's lovely. My book is set in the southeastern corner of Ohio, which is Appalachian territory, and my family of origin, both sides, are from eastern Kentucky, one very specific county. I'm the first person on either side for multiple generations to be born outside of that area. And as I was growing up, my parents, I was very late in life baby, so my parents had years before, along with their siblings, dispersed from that county in eastern Kentucky to find jobs. But they still would say, we're going down home. When it was time to visit grandma or my great aunts or anybody, we're going down home. So I kind of grew up with this, I'm here, but we're really from there. And, we're going down home. And when I came across Maud Collins as the first female sheriff in 1925 in Benton County, Ohio, she very much my character very much had to be of that place in that time for the story to make any sense at all. And because that part of Ohio is Appalachia as well, writing this, honestly, as corny as it may sound, felt like I'm going down home again, because I hadn't given myself permission to kind of dip into that aspect of my heritage. And it was so much fun to feel and hear the voices kind of come back to me of my father and my aunts and uncles and grandparents and great grandparents and cousins. I do have a few cousins who still live in that county. and to kind of let that flow through and tell the story. And nature is very much a part of Appalachia. And for me, like taking a hike here or in that part of Ohio, if I go to visit for research, it's a physical experience, but it's always a spiritual experience too. So, yeah.
Jess, you said you talked about how Maud Collins is that inspiration for that character. How did you come across her, and what kind of other research did you do? I know you're a journalist, but
I came across her simply because our younger daughter went to Ohio University, which is in that part of Ohio, and she majored in outdoor education, and she also played rugby. And we were looking for a place to go hiking with her on a birthday visit that would both be challenging for her, but not overwhelming for us. And so I simply did a Google search on places to hike near Ohio University, and the Vinton County tourism website popped up, and they happened to have a piece about Maud Collins, and I was immediately struck by the photo, the old time photo they had of her bio, and the notion of, a female sheriff in 1925 in rural Ohio. And that is a character I would never make up because it sounds on the surface incredibly improbable.
right.
So in terms of research, there's not a ton of information about Maud. And I didn't want to dig too deeply into Maud because Lily is inspired by Maud. Lily's story is from my imagination. It is not the life story of Maud. And in terms of other research, I've spent a lot of time over there, hiked around, it's coal mining territory. My family were all tobacco farmers, with a couple of coal miners thrown in. And I wanted to make sure I got the coal mining aspect right. So that's one area, especially for the first book. And then I try to keep that information up, where I did a lot of digging and reading about coal mining. And then just the history of that particular area turns out to be really fascinating. And particularly from the 20s through, even now, big global and national events like reach their fingers down into this particular area and really shape people's lives. So that's where I've spent a lot of time doing research.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much about the plot, but there is a connection with some of the characters and the women who were involved in the KKK, which was really a surprise. And then the connection between the KKK and women's suffrage, which of course we're hearing a lot about now because it's the 100th anniversary. So I felt that was really fascinating. Erica, what about you? I see the banjo behind you. Are you a musician? Are you just a music lover? Why did you want, did you do any research for for your book, or were you just sort of drawing on your own interest and love of music?
Yeah, so I am a wannabe musician who can never quite follow through. Like I played the guitar in high school. I keep trying to pick up this banjo, but the truth is that I cannot carry a tune in a bucket, and I have no sense of rhythm. So I have relegated myself to the place of music lover. Yeah, it's kind of funny because a lot of people have said to me, like, you're a bluegrass musician, right? You have to be a bluegrass musician to have written this book. But the truth is that I've never even touched a fiddle. Like I've never held a fiddle in my hands, but I listened to so much music to write this book. This music is filled with folk and bluegrass music. And so I pretty much, the entire time I worked on this book, from the first inkling of the idea all the way through to the final, proofreading, listened to so much bluegrass and folk. Jock Watson was my first inspiration, the song Shady Grove. And that's the name of my character, Shady Grove. And so that was a jumping off place for me, is his voice and his music. And of course I live in Nashville, which is the best place for bluegrass. So I went to a lot of shows at the Station Inn, at the Ryman Auditorium. I tried to just listen to as much music as I could, soak it all up. And then my spouse is a musician, more of a hobby musician, and plays some bluegrass. And so whenever I would say, I don't know if this terminology is quite right, I would run it by him, and he'd, help me kind of tweak those little things. So for me, my research was almost entirely just listening to music, getting to know all of these Appalachian murder ballads, these amazing bluegrass songs. But the funny thing is that I grew up around people who loved music like this. I grew up with my dad singing songs all the time that I didn't know. And then doing this research, I'm like, oh, that's the song Daddy used to sing all the time. Or like songs that my grandpa would play, on this like ancient tape deck. Suddenly these were the songs that I was hearing. So like, Jess, you said earlier that writing the novel felt like going home. And that's what this was like for me too. It was like this rediscovery of a past I'd almost forgotten. So that was actually like a really, really meaningful part of writing this book for me, was kind of reconnecting with my family, because I'm really different from my family. I'm the only person who went to college. I'm the only person who left home. And so I'm kind of this weirdo in Nashville, living a life that's really different from everyone else. And so I felt like for me, this book was in a lot of ways a way to just reconnect with my home, where I'm from. And my dad passed away. And so reconnecting with my memories of him and things I'd forgotten that he said. So yeah, there was a lot of personal life research, I guess, for this book.
Erica, I think one of the things that's really striking about your book is that there's a love triangle, and it's a LGBT love triangle, which is happening more in young adult fiction, but it's still new enough, I think, to make people notice. So, can you talk about that? Why you chose to have that in the book?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny you bring up the love triangle, because I feel like when I've heard from people either like really love it or they really hate it. Kind of the concept of a love triangle. I didn't really set out, like at the beginning, I didn't say to myself like, oh, I'm going to write this love triangle. It kind of happened naturally as I wrote this story. But the main character, Shady Grove, is bisexual, and I chose to write her that way because I'm also bi. And while we are starting to see a lot more LGBTQ rep in young adult, rarely do you see it in Southern areas or with low-income characters, and so there just aren't a lot of characters out there yet who are like that. And so I wanted to write a book with a bi main character and just let her, live her life. It's not a book about coming out. It's not a book about difficult conversations with parents. The main character just is bi and going through life and going through all the things that she experiences. And so the romance in my book, I used it more as a soft place for Shady, because she's dealing with so much hard stuff in this book. She's dealing with her grief for her dad. Her brother's been put in jail. Her stepdad is murdered. I mean, she has so much serious, heavy stuff going on in her life. And I thought, she deserves a chance to just have some of the normal teen drama in her life too, of trying to figure out her identity and navigate between two really different people. And so for me, the love triangle was a way for Shady to think through who she is in the present, apart from her family legacy, and what she wants her life to look like. And so those two romances in the book, I think, gave her a chance to do that in a way that is a little softer and a little warmer than some of the other themes in the book.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of giving your main character a soft place to rest from everything around her, everything that's going on around her. Just switching gears from plot to process, has COVID changed your writing process at all?
Not really, not for me.
No?
I mean, I think I am more easily distracted. Because particularly at the beginning of COVID, like constantly checking it's been 5 minutes. Is it done yet? And now I've, kind of adjusted to the reality that we're in, and that it's going to go on for a while. But I'm pretty introverted, and I work from home anyway. So yeah, if anything, I'm writing a little bit more. I will say that after I finished a current draft of the newest book in the series, I needed something to write. I went back to a short story that I had started like literally 30 years ago, and finally figured out what that short story should be. And after I finished that short story, I had to chuckle at myself, and I thought, wow, you really wanted to go back before all this. And it felt good to, finally, I don't know if I'll ever place it anywhere, but to finish that story. But for me, no, it really hasn't.
Yeah.
What about you, Erica?
Yeah, I don't think,
No?
I mean, like, I tend to react to anything bad that's happening by just like head down work. Like, that's kind of how I get through anything.
Right.
And I've been on deadline for my second book and other projects pretty much the entire last 6 months. So even if I didn't want to concentrate and work, I didn't have a whole lot of choice about that. But yeah, I'm like Jess. I'm introverted. I tend to be kind of a homebody anyway, and so I think. I think I'm finally starting to come up against that, brought my head up and seen the world a little bit away from my projects, and trying to just figure out how to navigate all of those intense feelings around COVID and get back to work on a new thing. And yeah, it's complicated, but mostly, I think I'm pretty much doing the same thing I always have.
Yeah, I think it will make well, since I was finishing a book and was on deadline when all this was hitting, and then I've been revising since and plotting the next one, I think it might complicate research. I think it's going to be harder to, because I like to go places and talk to people in person if I can, and I don't think that's going to be the case for the next book. But
Jess, are you working on the next another book in the kinship series, or something else completely different?
Yes, I just finished book 3 in the kinship series. It's called The Stills. That comes out next March, and it brings prohibitions in the background of my first 2 books. The Stills. You might not be surprised to hear this, given the title, brings prohibition in the foreground. And then I'm contracted through book 4, so I'm just now.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah,
that's exciting. So, what kind of research did you do for the Stills?
A lot of bourbon. No, I'm kidding. I did a lot of deep dive reading about the Prohibition era, and about a month before all this hit, I did go up to the Anti-Saloon League Museum in Westerville, Ohio, which was kind of, the central spot for Prohibition, the Prohibition movement. And it was really fascinating. I had, in reading and digging into articles, I'd come across this thing called a wine brick. It was like dehydrated grapes that were compressed into a brick, and the instructions were very clear. You should not, under any circumstances, put this in a bucket of water and forget about it in a dark place for 3 weeks. Which is exactly what people did, because it was legal. It was totally legal under the Volstead Act. And so when I saw a display that included this brick, I leapt up and yelped. I was so excited, and the museum docents are kind of looking at me like, we usually do not get that reaction to a dehydrated block of grape.
That's great. I have to say that someone in my husband's family did have a connection to a moonshine maker, and we used to get at Christmas, a few mason jars of a completely clear and extremely potent liquid.
Wow.
It was just very strong.
Very strong.
We used it quite modestly. And Erica, I know because you told me the other day that you were working on the second book, and it's another standalone.
Right, yeah, it's another
Yeah.
standalone, another YA contemporary fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is called The River Has Teeth, and it is set in Tennessee. So as I think I told you this in my email, but that I first got the idea for the book when I was at Bells Bend Park in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
I was there. It was the first time I'd ever gone there, and it was fall, and so like all of the brush was really dry, and there was no one there, and so there was this kind of surreal feeling of being there, and like the only sound was like the wind going through all of these dried plants. And I don't know, I had this feeling here like, oh, I have to write a book that has a setting like this. And so going to Bells Bend and then Beeman Park, which is really, really nearby it and is kind of rugged, pretty rugged for this part of Tennessee. The more time I spent in those parks, I was just like, I really want to write a book that's set here. And so for me, the setting of this book came before characters or voice or themes or anything else. It was just, I love this setting. This setting speaks to me. So this new book it's a little darker than Ghostwood Song. It's about girls are going missing on this nature park. And so the main character, Natasha, she's trying to figure out what's happened to her sister, who's one of the girls who's gone missing. And she goes to this other girl, Della, whose family are witches. They've actually been, interestingly, witches living on this land since Prohibition. Like her ancestors were moonshiners.
Wow, I love this.
Yeah,
I love
funny.
these connections. It's so much fun.
And so they like make their living selling brews. Many of them are just like vengeance kind of brews. And so Natasha goes to this witch for help. But what she doesn't know is that this witch thinks her mom might be the one responsible for all the girls who are going missing. So it's kind of a murder mystery set but with a lot of magic, a lot of monsters, kind of just what would some southern Tennessee witches look like today?
Fun. Oh, well, they both sound really exciting and fun. There aren't any questions from our audience, but I always have extra questions. And tell me just about what kind of reader you are. And were you a big reader as a child or a big writer as a child?
Oh, yeah.
I always like to hear what inspires people.
Right. Reading was, my escape. I kind of had a chaotic childhood. So writing and reading very early on were kind of my way of handling that and finding a path forward. So I've always written since I was little and always knew I wanted to be a writer. That, is just part of who I am. And in terms of what I love to read, I love obviously mystery because I write mystery. So I love to read. Some of my current favorites are Anne Cleeves. Laurie Roy writes beautiful standalone mysteries set in mid-century U.S. history. So those are fascinating. Let's see, William Kent Kruger. Ordinary Grace is one of my favorite books ever. Winter's Bone by Danielle Woodrell, which is very dark and kind of a mystery, but it's a coming of age. It's kind of Nancy Drew meets Meth Lab with a lot of literary, beautiful writing, which it sounds really facetious and isn't meant to be. But it's just so evocative about identity and community and where does the individual identity end and the allegiance to community begin, and that's like a huge theme for me. So and growing up I read some mysteries, of course, Nancy Drew, but I also loved and still love really good sci-fi. So John Scalzi is a fabulous current master, and another writer named Cameron Hurley. They both happen to be Ohio writers, but if you're into really interesting sci-fi, I would recommend those two.
Erica?
Yeah, me too. I was always a reader, a very early reader. Same thing, chaotic childhood. It was the escape. You would find me often literally up in a tree reading a book. But I didn't, it's interesting. I didn't, what I write now, young adult fantasy, isn't really what I've always read. I tended to read a lot of classics as a young person. I did, my master's degree, I was focusing on Virginia Woolf and the British modernists. So this isn't really like an area I would ever have expected to be writing in. But I read then this Laini Taylor novel. She's a young adult author, fairly well known. And I was like, wow, I could be writing this. This is so fun. I didn't know that like genre writing could be this beautiful and this interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Daughter of Smoke and Bone, I think is the title of Laini Taylor's. And so I started writing young adult fantasy based on that. And then I read, do you know Jeff Zentner's young adult novel, The Serpent King? He's a Nashville author. And it's a Southern book set around the Nashville area. And that's when it hit me like, wow, I could be writing like fantasy that is actually like not just some secondary world stuff, but like from where I'm from, I could be writing Southern fantasy, which, there aren't a ton of people doing. So
Right.
that's kind of how I got into what I'm writing now. Most of my literary influences are, I guess you would call them sort of like literary mystery writers, like Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Haunting of Hill House. I love Sarah Waters, who's a historical mystery writer. Tends toward the more literary side. I love Daphne du Maurier, who can spin an atmosphere like no one else.
Mm-hmm.
These days, I read a lot of young adult fantasy these days. But lately, I've been on a dark academia kick and reading some older books like Donna Tartt's The Secret History. So I read pretty widely, I guess. But I love literary, I love mystery, and I love fantasy.
Gotcha. Is there something that you hope that your readers will take away from your novels besides enjoyment?
Sure. For me, it would be empathy.
Empathy?
Empathy. Yeah, I think that's really key to finding the balance between individuality and community. Because I think those two are always in tension with one another. And I just think, the ability to try to see the world from a different point of view than your own is the key to empathy. And so I hope that my characters work on that. It's key to solving, they're the kinship mysteries, not just because I named the town Kinship, but because kinship and community is the theme of the series. I mean, each book has two narrators, Lily, the detective, and then a second narrator that's from the community, and who that second narrator is changes with each book. But Lily's like the heart and the center of this community and this series. But yeah, that's what I hope people take away.
Eric?
I think what I would want readers to take away is a sense of hope for finding your way out of the darkness. I think, we get a lot of wonderful things from our families, but we get a lot of bad stuff too. We inherit some generational trauma. We inherit some bad ways of thinking. We inherit some of our family's darkness. And so I would hope that my book would give people a sense of some of the ways you might find your way out of that darkness and kind of forge your own path in life.
That's great. Well, it has been such a pleasure to talk to both of you. We're going to wrap up. I don't think that there are any questions, but I am told that there were many attentive listeners, which is great. I'm going to say once again, thank you to Tennessee Humanities. If people are interested in these books, and they're wonderful, I'm going to show you again. I cannot get the look of this right. There's the whole list. Wait 1 second. Drop the other one. And here's Ghostwood Song. that they can order them from Parnassus or have them sent or go pick them up. Parnassus is one of the sponsors, and it's because of Parnassus that we are able to do things like the Southern Festival of Books for free. I hope to meet both of you in the future. I hope you're here next year with your new books. This has really been a pleasure from all of us at the Southern Festival. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.